Story, Ramonda the Queen Mother. In 1994, spy masters from 10 nations formed an alliance for the purpose of retrieving and sharing information on Wakanda. Callas was a member of the group, and he was shadowing Ramonda in Berlin when the Lemurian reprisal attack on Ramonda and her entourage started. Callas saw a rare chance to capture Ramonda for information on Wakanda. He called up Kolar the superhuman runner, Strike Out the living electromagnetic pulse, Glimmer the teleporter, and the Bayern brothers. The Lemurians used vaporization tech weapons, and Ramonda's bodyguards carried sophisticated armaments. The two groups tore apart the busy Wilhelmstrasse street in their clash. Vehicles were either thrown into the air or balled up like they were crushed in a titan's hand. Callas used the melee as cover to snatch Ramonda. He ordered Strikeout to deactivate all electronic devices on and inside of Ramonda, which switched off the implanted tracking signal. Kolar dashed into the battle. He grabbed and carried away Ramonda. 15 seconds later, Kolar arrived outside the city with the prize. However, Kolar was sloppy. He paid for it. He had stopped at the rendezvous point with Ramonda, and she attacked his eyes with her nails. "Ag!" screamed Kolar, and he dropped Ramonda. She then attempted to flee. The Bayern twins surrounded Ramonda, so she employed her self-defense training on the brothers. However, the brothers were protected by armor that appeared as a blue glow around their bodies. The burly brothers subdued Ramonda, and they injected her with a sleeping agent. Ramonda's green Wakandan headwear fell off in the tussle. Meanwhile, Kolar yelled in pain due to the loss of his eyes. However, the brothers ignored him. The Bayerns had no pity for a soldier who had allowed a woman, just past 60, to harm him in such a manner. Glimmer appeared, and she teleported Ramonda to the base in Turkey, where Callas waited along with Raven the Psychic. Ramonda was placed in a chair, and Raven tried to enter her mind, but without success. "Psi shields," said Raven. "And something else, probably mystic." "Then we will do it the messy way," said Callas in his cigarette's tainted breath. He hastily organized brain extraction surgeons. After the job was done, Callas planned to incinerate Ramonda's body. He was sure that her disappearance would be attributed to vaporization by the Lemurians. Chapter: An image of Ramonda was imprinted in T'Challa's mind from a family trip to the Kanga Snow Peak. A beautiful Ramonda had stood in front of a wall of purple violets which shared her name. The trip had occurred in T'Challa's childhood. When he got older, he learned that Ramonda violets were both beautiful and hardy. Therefore, he thought his mother was the same, that she would survive almost anything. T'Challa doubted that Ramonda was dead. He expressed his belief to Ororo, and she felt the same way. But Ororo knew her husband, hence, she sensed he was not telling her something else that bothered him. Ororo leaned over to T'Challa, who was flying the jet to Berlin. "What else?" whispered Ororo. T'Challa grinned because he was caught, so he opened up further. "Lately I have been taking her for granted, and I did not like how she treated Umba. So for this to happen now," whispered T'Challa. Ororo kissed the side of T'Challa's face. "I understand," she whispered. Then Ororo settled in her seat. T'Challa glanced behind him, and he saw Shuri staring out the window. Then he looked at Umba, who had his arms crossed. What could they be thinking about? T'Challa pondered while he faced forward. Chapter: Shuri turned from the window, and she studied the solidly built T'Challa, who was directly in front of her. Shuri remembered that once she had disliked her brother because she believed Ramonda had loved him more than her. "I must have been 7 or 8 at the time," Shuri thought. "When I see mother again, I will have to ask why she changed after father died," Shuri said to herself. The reason was that Shuri believed her father's death transformed everything in her life. Ramonda became stricter, and Shuri had felt like she never lived up to her mother's expectations. Whatever they were, Shuri thought. Shuri had noticed that Ramonda was lenient on T'Challa as opposed to her. Then she felt pushed out by her mother when Ororo had joined the family. Evidently Ramonda had taken a strong liking for her daughter-in-law. Shuri turned to Ororo, who was in the co-pilot seat while her left hand held T'Challa's hand. Shuri wondered what her sister-in-law was thinking about. What are her thoughts on mother? Shuri asked herself. Shuri recollected on her first meeting with her sister-in-law. It lasted 1 minute. T'Challa introduced Ororo, and Shuri had greeted her politely. Admittedly, Shuri had found Ororo's white hair weird. Also, Shuri had known about mutants, but she never expected that one would enter the family. Nevertheless, Shuri respected the woman who held her brother's heart, especially after she learned Ororo's background. She was glad that Ororo made T'Challa happy. Shuri heard a sound and it came from her left side. She glanced to the direction where Umba was seated. The stocky teenager had reclined his seat. Truthfully, Umba was a stranger to Shuri. Yet T'Challa and Ororo treat him like a son. Does he give them trouble? Shuri asked herself. Umba's addition to the family prompted other questions in Shuri's mind. What kind of an aunt would I be if T'Challa and Ororo do have a child? And will I make T'Challa an uncle anytime soon? Shuri asked within herself. She had not met anyone who passed her standards, not that she was actively looking for a husband. Shuri slipped the kimono out of her commando belt. She scrolled through the folders on the screen with her right thumb until she came across a picture of her mother and father. The picture was taken when Ramonda was in her 20s. Remarkably, Shuri resembled her mother from the medium haircut to the deep brown eyes. On the other hand, the handsome T'Chaka was 6'3", broad shoulders, and muscular. Often Shuri recollected that her father was kind to her. When T'Chaka died, it took Shuri a month to understand that he was truly gone, because she was so young at the time. As Shuri viewed the picture, she could tell that her parents were deeply in love with each other. And Shuri still loved her mother despite their difficulties. Shuri returned the kimono to the belt. Then she continued to stare out the window at the night sky. Chapter Umba turned to his right side at Shuri. The visor computer described the woman as being shapely, busty, and slender. I wonder if she dislikes me learning the Black Panther martial arts like Ramonda does? Thought Umba. If so, then that is her problem. Then he remembered his private meeting with Ramonda and the strange question she had asked him. What if you found out that your mother was alive? What would you do? Ramonda had inquired in a polite manner. It will depend on the situation, Umba had responded in a dodgy way. As Umba recollected on the discussion, he became uncomfortable. The reason was that he had taken his father's explanation as sacrosanct. But if my mother is alive, will I have to choose between her and my new life? Umba introspected. Umba turned away from Shuri, and he concentrated on Ramonda. He felt like the meeting was an examination to find out if he was worthy to be a part of the family. Then Ramonda had asked if he was trustworthy. That had bothered Umba, although he had replied, "Yet." Umba had felt like he had lied to Ramonda, because he was not totally honest with T'Challa and Ororo. Honesty was the first rule Ororo stated should be followed in her household. Additionally, Ororo was becoming suspicious of him. Before he had boarded the jet, he was thinking about Enzi and the secret society. Is everything all right? Ororo had asked as she held his right shoulder. You seem so distant recently. Everything is fine, he had replied. As Umba thought about the incident with Ororo, he clenched his fist in frustration. Why is everything so complicated? He asked inwardly. Meanwhile, Ororo remembered Ramonda's story of how she met Ramonda was a young scientist who studied Wakanda's ancient mystics. A particular mystic was close to the royal family, and while Ramonda interviewed him, suddenly King T'Chaka showed up at the house. He was 3 years older than Ramonda. Immediately Ramonda and T'Chaka liked each other, they stayed in touch and a romance ensued. Several months later, T'Chaka proposed marriage and Ramonda accepted. She really loved him, thought Ororo. Ororo knew more about Ramonda's treatment of T'Challa and Shuri better than the siblings did. Ramonda had explained to Ororo the decision she made the night of T'Chaka's funeral. "We did not know if the country was going to be attacked with T'Chaka gone. I was solely in charge of the nation. That meant if I fell in battle, T'Challa and Shuri would be next," said Ramonda. "Therefore I sped up their preparations both mentally and physically to become rulers of Wakanda. I became extra tough on both of them." Then T'Challa went on his sojourn into the rest of Africa. Afterwards he returned mentally tougher. As a result, I lessened my control on him. As for Shuri, I kept pushing her. But I feel like I created a wedge between Shuri and myself. "That is unfortunate for such a thing to happen between you and Shuri," Ororo had remarked. "But I don't regret what I did. Shuri has become stronger because of it," said Ramonda. Nonetheless, Ororo thought that Ramonda should try to close the rift between Shuri. Despite that point, Ororo liked Ramonda, because the Queen Mother was at times cheerful, insightful, and helpful. Abruptly Ororo snapped out of the memory. She focused on the bulletin that appeared on the dashboard computer screen. The bulletin from the Wakanda Secret Service stated that the trace of the encrypted transmission intercepted during the battle was almost complete. Then Ororo thought about the organizers of the function Ramonda was attending in Berlin. Attendees at the function and bystanders were either hurt or killed in the battle. "We have to send our condolences," thought Ororo. Ororo tried to remember the name of the chief organizer, but it did not come to her at first. Afterwards the name did come. Amin was the organizer, and Ramonda had contacted him to give a substantial donation to his African Immigrants Foundation. Hence Ramonda was in Berlin for the handover ceremony. Chapter: A new bulletin appeared on the screen. The trace was completed and the transmission came from northwest Turkey. "What do you think?" asked T'Challa. "We are already in the area, so let's check it out," replied Ororo. Shuri heard T'Challa and Ororo, therefore, she stopped staring out of the window, and she focused on the couple. "What's going on?" inquired Shuri. "The unknown transmission came from Turkey." "We are going there," responded T'Challa. "So it really was not the German Secret Service," said Shuri under her breath. "We are getting the satellite images now," said Ororo. Meanwhile T'Challa steered the jet from the course to Europe. Turkey was a few minutes away. At the same time, Umba returned his seat to the normal position. Ororo looked around at him. "Have you been to Turkey?" inquired Ororo. "Yeah, once to buy arms," answered Umba. "All right." The transmission came from a building, and then Ororo described the images on the screen to Umba. Chapter: Callus was 60 years old, yet his body looked 10 years younger. He smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day, although he wanted to quit the habit. Furthermore, he was a second-generation spy. His father had been a damn good one, as he remembered. But Callus was better, and he had entered the spy game at age 20. His successes were never made public due to national security. Nevertheless, he had an admirable record. Therefore he considered the capture of Ramonda as another proverbial notch in the belt. He watched as a sedated Ramonda was wheeled into the makeshift surgery theater. Meanwhile he heard the CNN news report on Ramonda's disappearance on the television that was in the background. "T'Challa and Ororo, the leaders of Wakanda, are expected in Berlin," said the female news presenter. Callus smiled when he heard the news. They won't find her, he thought. Then he reached for a pack of cigarettes in his trouser pocket. Afterwards he neared the plastic screen that separated the operation theater from the environment. A surgeon prepared a laser while an assistant outlined incision areas on Ramonda's head. In related news, the United Nations will be voting soon on the all-important mutant policy, said the news presenter. Then suddenly the power in the building went. The place became pitch black and Callus smiled as his body transformed. He eventually became one with the darkness. He had received the powers from Nakia, an underworld geneticist out of Africa. Instinctively Callus knew that his scheme was discovered. As a result, he had to remove the evidence. Callus entered the operation theater. Meanwhile, his fingers grew claws. He saw the surgeons clearly, and they reminded him of stunned animals. Subsequently Callus slashed the surgeons to death. Then he turned towards Ramonda and he moved to end her life. Chapter: An explosion tore through the ceiling outside the surgery theater. T'Challa, Ororo, Umba, and Shuri dropped inside. Ororo's hands glowed from the plasma energy around them. T'Challa's and Ororo's natural night vision meant that they saw Ramonda. "She's here," said T'Challa. Therefore Ororo and him rushed into the surgery theater. On the other hand, Shuri used the infrared vision on her mask's optics and she scanned the vicinity for hostiles. Her sonic wave cannon was armed and ready. As for Umba, he relied on his alert hearing. Nevertheless, no one detected Callus. T'Challa stormed into the surgery theater, and he used the claws from his gloves to cut Ramonda loose from the straps. Incidentally, T'Challa blocked Callus from striking Ramonda. Callus knew his claws would be useless against T'Challa's body armor, hence, he focused on killing Ororo and he moved within striking distance of her. "Home!" shouted T'Challa for the sword computers to hear. Subsequently the quartet and Ramonda teleported from the building. Thus Callus was left alone. "Next time," said Callus. Afterwards Callus slipped out the building, and he used the darkness of the night. His only worry was that Ramonda had seen his face. "Sloppy work, Callus," he told himself. "Now I have to put things in place for when they do come." Chapter: Thousands had gathered outside the Central City Medical Complex. Then the doors to the complex opened and Ramonda walked out. Instantaneously cheers and hand claps erupted from those gathered. Ramonda waved at the people, and she smiled. "Thank you," said Ramonda. Her family exited the medical center and they escorted her into the transport. Eventually Ramonda sat between T'Challa and Ororo while Umba and Shuri were seated opposite. But Ramonda was in a serious mood as the transport vehicle moved out. "It's like we get new enemies every day," said Ramonda. "And this one has been lurking in the shadows for some time now." "We'll take care of it, Mother," said Shuri. "I know it will be taken care of, Shuri. I was just making a comment," said Ramonda while she stared at her daughter straight in the eye. Shuri stared back with the same intensity. T'Challa noticed the tension, so he spoke up. He was always aware of the quiet conflict that his mother and sister had at times. "We will start running the captor's face through the system," said T'Challa. "I also have to speak with Emin," said Ramonda. "I would like to visit him." "I'll contact the German Chancellor," said Ororo. "We also have to donate to the reconstruction of that part of the city." "We should," said Ramonda. Then she looked at the quiet Umba. She hoped that he did not take their talk personally. She just wanted all the facets of the Black Panther kept sacred, not to be given to just anyone. Eventually the transport vehicle arrived at Ramonda's home and the passengers disembarked. Once inside the house, T'Challa, Ororo, Umba, and Shuri began preparing a meal for Ramonda. Meanwhile the Queen Mother sat on her bed and she viewed a picture of T'Chaka. "We were almost reunited today," said Ramonda. But it was not my time to go. And no grants as yet either from T'Challa and Shuri. I don't know what they are doing. Ramonda smiled, and then she remembered younger days. Happy days. Afterwards she returned the picture to the dresser and she rested on the bed. A while after, Shuri came to get her. "We're ready for you downstairs," said Shuri. "And I'm really glad that you are safe and sound." Ramonda approached her daughter. "Thank you," said Ramonda. Then they hugged each other. Chapter The family had the meal on the veranda. Ramonda kept the occasion lively with a story of an event that occurred near the Crystal Forest. Even Umba had to laugh at the jokes, despite his attempt to remain bottled up. Eventually night came, still no one left the house. Ramonda rested while everyone else cleaned up. Then she called Ammon. "I send my condolences to everyone that got caught up in the attack," said Ramonda. "Thank you," said Ammon. "But something else has come to light." "What is it?" "The donation money. It has gone missing," replied Ammon. Ramonda was perplexed and she rubbed her forehead slightly. $60 million doesn't simply go missing, said Ramonda. "We sent the money directly to the bank account." "That's the thing," said Ammon. "The manager for the account has also disappeared. Apparently he crashed into the Spree River. But the body has not been recovered." "Okay. Explain everything from the beginning," said Ramonda, and she kept her calmness. Thereafter Ammon provided the details of the theft. Ramonda went to T'Challa and Ororo. Then she told them of the loss of Wakanda's money. "What's the manager's name?" asked T'Challa. "Metzler," replied Ramonda. "We will get on it," said Ororo.